Hello and welcome back. Now it is time for our live Q&A. So thank you to those of you who've had your questions in already. If you have anything further, do share them. So please can we welcome Marilyn Hughes to the stage.
Hi, Marilyn. It's good to see you.
It's so strange to be welcoming another Marilyn. I don't know that many
I
of
know.
them.
It kind of throws me off a little, but it's great because you're right. We don't see that many.
Oh, thank you for another wonderful, enlightening, and very thought-provoking session. So we're going to kick off with the questions. We've got a couple of practical questions, so we'll just handle
Okay.
those, and then we'll go deeper into the material that you've been talking about. And they're
Okay.
very similar. So the first practical question is, can we have a written list? And it might be that it's on your website. They're saying, can we have a written list of the names of all the mystics you mentioned?
Sure. In fact, you should be receiving that after the full day conference is over. That's already on its way to you.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
That is brilliant. That's handled. We like that. Second question, very similar. Can we have the, and I know you mentioned a few books actually. I think you mentioned 3 at the opening and then you directed us to your website. And they're saying, can we have the name of the book you quoted? So it may be, I'm not sure which one they're referring to because I know you mentioned more than one at the start.
Okay, yeah, there's several books that I mentioned at the start, and that will also be included. All of them will be included in that handout that will be available for everyone afterwards.
Wonderful. So with
Absolutely.
practicalities out of the way, we now go straight into the soul. So the first question is, what is the definition of the soul?
Well, the soul is, the spiritual part of what animates us in this physical realm here. But the soul has the capacity to be much more. In the physical realm, we have the capacity to encompass this personality. There is more of a limited flask that, a physical body and a physical personality encompass. The soul being, higher, finer frequency vibrational particles, also has the capacity to take on literally multitudinous forms. So, the soul has the capacity to contain within it all personalities, all knowledge, all wisdom, and it has this infinite potential that we can access and also cultivate. And so when you think of, the physical body as the glass when you're looking at a glass of water, and the soul is the water that we can pour in. But that water can be an infinite source. The soul can be an infinite source, but it takes the work, the cultivation to make it infinite for us to do that and bring that within the glass and our flask, which is our physical body.
Wonderful. Thank you. And now I'm going to have a sip of water. Now you've got me thinking about water. Our next question is, what if the positive and the negative were just an experience, a pure game and a pure illusion? So this is more theoretical. I'll say that again. What if the positive and negative were just an experience, a pure game and a pure illusion?
Okay. Well, I guess the key word in there is if. What if? So what if, then I guess life would be very cruel, pretty meaningless, and but we have to when you take out the if and you go to, okay, but is that what it is? And No, it isn't that way. One of the first things we find in the mystical realms is that there are positive and negatively charged particles. There are positively and negatively charged actions. There is an energetic truth which guides the actions behind everything and every activity, every creation on the ground, everything that we do, which determines its eternal value in the grander scheme of things. And so it doesn't really matter if, because it isn't. So what we have is a real simple way to understand this is positively charged actions are creative, and they will create and bring new life into the realm, whereas negatively charged are destructive, and they bring about destruction and death, and they destroy things. And in that value, if you just take the moment to contemplate that, then you see why it's not a value judgment. It's a simple judgment of, is this serving the path that I seek? Am I moving forward towards God? Am I moving further away and into the darkness? And where do I really want to be? And as we enter into the mystical spheres in out-of-body travel or in the afterlife experience, we find out very quickly, we make a pretty quick decision of, ooh, I'm not sure I like this, but I do want that. So we can, we make a value judgment pretty darn quick, you know what I mean? Because of, unconditional love, or the absence of love and the absence of God, which is a very huge emptiness and void. And so you feel it in a substantial way that is pretty horrifying, frankly. So so what we want to do then is take it back to, okay, so what if then it would be a cruel, painful, and pretty horrifying existence for all of us, and pointless. But this isn't how things move in the realms of evolution. And so then we take it back to, well, how is it? And how can we work within the mechanism of evolution as God has set it up for us?
Wonderful. Now we're going to stay with the if question, because I know one of the questions that people often ask of God and religion, if there is a God, why is there so much suffering and loss, and what is the purpose of that?
Well, we go back to free will, which is, I think, one of the hardest things for humanity to accept, which is that, this moment where God gave us all individually free will is the reason why we experience suffering and loss and pain, because we make decisions that have consequences, that are natural consequences to some of the things that we do. Sometimes these are things that we can predict, and sometimes they are things that we cannot predict. Sometimes it's the furthest thing you would think would happen from the nature of the action that you may have taken. Sometimes it's just the fact that we live in a realm where we are mortal beings, and so therefore death happens. And because of the fact that death is a real experience, as much as spiritual people, we'd like to talk about transcending it, and that we kind of do, but we do not transcend grief. We can't transcend suffering or pain. You know, when someone is deeply wounded or goes through a terrible accident or has a painful illness, they're going to experience the pain. When people lose someone they love, they're going to experience the grief. So these are just parts and parcel of a mortal realm, which means that this is a temporary place. We're only here for a short period of time. What's the purpose of it? The purpose of it is that we are to bring that which is of heaven into this physical manifestation on earth. But a big portion of this has to do with bringing that consciousness into the physical receptacle, that awareness, that awakened consciousness into the physical receptacle. And it's this purification process that we go through that allows us to cultivate the necessary aspects of existence that are going to help us to make sense, make a little more sense of what we have to experience in this world. It doesn't take away grief, it doesn't take away pain, but it helps us to better understand it. But the primary understanding does go back to the fact mortal realm means temporary realm. And if it's temporary, we're not going to be here forever. And so we're gonna go through losses. We're gonna go through losses.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm going to take you back to something you talked about in the first segment of the talk, and it was also talking about some of the lifetimes you had. And you talked about a lifetime of slavery, and you're also
Sure.
talking about, you know, effectively right and wrong and all the rest of that. So we've had lots of rioting recently, and you talked about the fact that riots are not a way forward. In the modern context, the riots have come about because people haven't felt that they've been heard, and they've tried peacefully explaining and patiently waiting for several hundred years for what they would call equality. So what would you say is a good alternative to rioting, given that the other alternatives so far haven't worked? What would you say in the context of the conversation you started with today?
Well, certainly you go back to what we were talking about with creation versus destruction. And so you would look at, well, what are the things that we can be doing that will actually bring about the consequences of and the circumstances that would make for what it is that we say that we are asking for. So we would remove destructive actions. Certainly destroying, burning, looting, injuring other people, killing other people is destruction. And it moves over here into the darkness, and much of it goes into actual evil. A great deal of this has gone way, way into the evil. So it's into the dark evil pole. And what's happening is it's being utilized by people who have their own agenda, so to speak, about wanting to commit acts that they know are dark, wrong, evil, but call it good. And they can't do that. You know, St. Catherine of Siena always said, never sin in the commission of a good. And so we cannot say that, murdering another person. You know, we've had a lot of police officers killed in the United States. Many of them have been black. Over these riots, we've had a lot of people who've been very seriously injured as well. You cannot say that that is forwarding any purpose except death. We've had a lot of businesses that have been burned down. All that's doing is destroying someone's lifelong creative work, and calling it good because you're saying it's in the name of racial equality, when in fact it's not. It's actually for the purpose of destroying that creative work. So what you have to look at is, who are the people who have made positive changes in the world that we remember. And people who are still with us, some of which, we have people like, we have, excuse me there, we have people that are kind of joined together for their solidarity, like the Dalai Lama, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr. And these people were all heralded because they created massive social change with nonviolence. Now we know that doesn't always work, and I'm not like a military historian, so I'm not even going to go there. But and I know that Tibet is still not free, and I get that. So we have a lot of questions on all these sides. But we do have examples of people who have done amazing things. We also have, for instance, we just recently lost one of Martin Luther King's friends, John Lewis, who became a lifelong senator in the United States Senate and did a whole bunch of things over the last 30 years. He was around for all sorts of changes that involved civil rights and the things that we now see in our society. I think this is very important. So I apologize if I'm taking a little extra time on it. But someone like John Lewis, whether you agree with his particular politics or not, he did what I would suggest. He took a creative and constructive route for change. He took his gifts and he utilized them to make things happen. And so then you also want to look at, first of all, you want to look at what has changed. Okay, and so I'm old enough to remember, around the civil rights period, where right before, I was probably too young to be around during the, the separate bathrooms and all these strange things that went on before I was born. But I was around the time when they started doing the busing and the desegregations. And so I watched a lot of this growing up and also growing older, But, when I was watching, President Nixon resign from office in 1972, I would never have imagined having a black president. I would have never imagined having a black female. I would have never imagined having any female run for any office, and then we had several women run for vice president. And we also have had a female presidential candidate. We now have had 2 black women who have been in key positions in the United States presidential offices, and many people are working in, attorney generals all over. So what we want to do is have perspective, because, we can also remember as women that when I was growing up, there were a lot of things that I didn't expect to see by the time I was 55 years old that I do see now. So we have to remember change comes in pieces, and change comes, and we want to look at it quantitatively, because where we are today in 2020 versus where we are in 55, 65, right before the civil rights movement, is catastrophically, profoundly different. It is completely different. Of course, we still see sexism. We still see that there are people who are racist, but it is not the kind of overriding thing that you saw then. There have been massive movements. When I was growing up and we were desegregating schools and we had to do busing, they were doing that because whites, blacks, and other people all lived in different neighborhoods. The reason we don't have to do that anymore is because we all live in the same neighborhoods. So, to me, I think we look at all of these things. There have been a lot of very positive moves in the right direction. So that's very important. We need to know that. But then we also have to remember anything that you're doing to destroy is not something that's energized by God. It's energized by the dark side. And destroying history is always doing the same. Destroying art and destroying history. We all know that those who forget their own history are doomed to repeat it. I would also just throw out one more thought and then I'll stop. I promise. But, there was a movie that was done, a few, I don't know, 10 years ago, and it was called Amazing Grace. And it was about Mr. Wilberforce and his fight in the United Kingdom in Parliament to get slavery and the slave ships out of business. And it happened like 60 or 70 years before this American Civil War. And, Mr. Wilberforce suffered from a pretty serious case of Crohn's disease, died very young. Not everyone knows this, but the song Amazing Grace was written by a former slave ship owner who had a major conversion. He was convicted in the spirit and realized, this is horrible. I cannot do this anymore. And he is the one who motivated Mr. Wilberforce to spend his life's work overturning those laws in the United Kingdom. And he did, but it took like 20 or 30 years, and he died like in his, like right after. He didn't live that long because he had Crohn's disease. But what we forget is that it's the type of diligent, cultivated, and really careful, creative, forward-moving efforts like these that make long, indelible, lasting, meaningful change. It's not doing more destructive things or harming more people. It's doing something of value.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And the next question we're going to ask, and this brings it almost down to the individual level, it's the question about choices. People, all humans, as you said if you picked apart all of the lives of all of the saints and the Buddhas, they would all have things in their life which, were not great. When people make bad choices, if they make them in good faith, can they still remain on the purification path, or does making a bad choice, regardless of the motivation behind it, take you off path?
That's a great question. And ironically, I encourage people to, watch this documentary on the grand phases of the soul, because this is going to lay out for you this purification path. One of the most important things to realize about the purification path and the lives of the saints is that the only different thing about the saints and the rest of us is that the saints, when they fell, they eventually got back up. And so if we just get back up and it's like, okay, I messed up again, oops, then we're going to keep going. Yes, it does. It does take us off for that moment, but we also have the power with a simple decision of, okay, oops. And like you said, you're talking about a decision that we all make, which is not even intentionally taking us off the path, which all of us do. That doesn't even necessarily take us off any path. An intentional decision or choice might, but an intentional decision or choice to get back on would bring you right back. Any type of mistake in our path, it's just simply as, we got to get back up. That's all. That's all. Nothing takes us away from the love of God and the mercy of God. I want to stress this. Jesus said to Saint Faustina, the apostle of the divine mercy, she lived in the 1930s, he said, tell people that my mercy is my greatest attribute. So we must always remember this, that God is always waiting for us. He's always waiting for us to come back, no matter how far we may fall. He's always wanting us to return. There's nothing that we cannot come back from, because he's always waiting to shower those graces and bring us back into the fold. And that is one of the most beautiful things about God that I have learned in my experiences, is how quickly he responds to the cry of a soul. It's instant. It's a miraculous and beautiful thing to see in the mystical spheres, I'll tell you that.
Okay, now one of the questions I had, which is going to be almost a little bit of a challenge to that one. One of the questions is, what would you say to people who, in their minds, they're on the path, they have always been on the path, they have not left the path, and they have prayed to God for a particular outcome or the resolution of a particular situation, and their prayer in their mind has not been answered? What would you say to people who find themselves in that position?
I would say that sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is maybe, sometimes the answer is not yet, and sometimes the answer is no. And so we have to remember, we ask, but we don't know what's best for us. God knows what's best for us. So sometimes we do not get the answer that we pray for. And it's not that the prayer wasn't heard, or that it isn't being heard. It just means that the answer might be no. The answer might be not yet. The answer might be not quite exactly what you're thinking or when, you know. And so we have to remind ourselves, and we can even do this in prayer, of, okay, so I'm starting to realize that what I have in my mind might not be how this is going to play out. So, Lord, give me the grace to receive what I need to understand about how I can better follow how this is going to play out, so that I can be a better steward of the path, because that happens to all of us as well. So getting an answer of no is not any indication that God has, not given you his favor, or that he is upset or anything like this. It just means that God knows better than we do what's going to be the best outcome. And so, I say that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because bad things happen to good people. And so I'll just leave it with that, because people know that bad things happen to good people. So there are things that we will face in life that we don't expect, that we're going to be thrown for a loop on. But we have to trust God through it. Doesn't mean it makes it easy, doesn't take away the pain. We just have to hold on to him while we're moving through it, the horrible, difficult part of it, which unfortunately we all do experience at different points in life.
Wonderful, thank you. And in this workshop, Dr. Bruce Lipton talked about it a lot. Greg Braden also touched on it. The thing of affirmations, and I think it's a question that also comes up with prayer. In your mind, if somebody's putting a prayer out, how often do they need to say the prayer? Is praying once enough? Because I know sometimes if it doesn't come, as we just been said, people pray again and again and again and again. So what's your thought in terms of the regularity of prayer on a particular issue? Pray once, hand it over to God, or is there a process that you would kind of suggest?
I generally pray until a clear outcome has been attained. And part of that comes from St. Paul's admonition to pray without ceasing. And, in the Orthodox tradition, there's something called the Jesus prayer, which is part of their attempt to pray without ceasing. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on us sinners. And what they will do is pray that even interiorly as they're working throughout the day. So for me, I have prayers that I will just pray for as long as an outcome is not determined. And I have a prayer altar where I sleep and where I meditate, and I have little slips of paper and I with the different prayer needs that I'm praying for, and then I will move them around to different places that I have for things that are resolved. And then even for the things that appear to be resolved, I put them in the permanent prayer box, because I want them to continue to receive prayer. But then we have the ones that are in the most urgent, prayer, and the ones that are moving into the less and less because things are happening. And so for me, I think it is a really good thing to do this. And I think, one of the reasons you see this in the world religions, in Christianity, in Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, this repetition, because a lot of people, the next question will be, well, they said you shouldn't do repetitive prayer, and but it's kind of one of these things, where you get you don't want to get caught up in too much. Don't get caught up in the details too much, but because that's not what they're saying. Don't keep praying for someone who needs prayer or for a need that requires prayer. And when you're talking about like affirmation as well, putting out an energy that's positive of what you want to project, even just helping you to reprogram the way you're thinking is very helpful for individuals to alter the way that they're projecting their own self-image to the universe and back to themselves. And that can be very helpful because we can either talk ourselves into talk ourselves down or talk ourselves up. And when I say up and down, I talk about, I'm thinking of, we can make ourselves feel bad about ourselves, or we can bring ourselves into a higher joyous state. I'm not talking about pride or humility right now. I'm talking about this choosing joy over feeling wretched and like you're never good enough, and so some of these affirmations are very helpful for a lot of people who get stuck in that sort of thing. But this is part of the reason a lot of the world religions do this. And ironically, in Catholicism, they have the rosary, but Buddhists have prayer beads as well. They have something similar, as well as Muslims. They also have a set of prayer beads, and they have a similar prayer practice, this repetition of certain either mantras or certain prayers. It's literally, and I'll just throw in, one of my spiritual counseling clients had asked me, why do you repeat all these Hail Marys in the Catholic rosary? And I said, well, and I said, I'll pray about it. I'll let you know if I get an answer. And I did. So I'm going to share with you the answer. The answer was, I was taken up into the mystical spheres, and I saw this tapestry, and it's beautiful tapestry, and every Hail Mary and Our Father was like a stitch in this tapestry. We were weaving this beautiful tapestry in heaven, which was covering the earth over with prayer. And so that's what we're doing when we do the affirmations and when we do the repeated types of prayer that we speak in our minds throughout the day, and or the prayer times that we choose. And so it is a very efficacious practice.
Oh, I love that. And I don't think I've ever heard anyone saying about writing the prayers and moving them from we're still working on this to completed to permanently done. love that process. Sharing. Now, one of the questions comes from, you mentioned about there being lower realms and parallel realms versus things coming from God. Now, I'm not talking about people who knowingly and willfully are doing something not good, but how can you tell the difference between when wisdom comes from the lower realm, when it comes from a parallel realm, or when it comes from God? What are the things that people might notice based on where that wisdom is coming from if they haven't yet got the sense to discern that for themselves?
That's a really important question, you know. And this is one of the things that you will continue to learn as you go down the purification path. So I highly suggest considering doing that, because that is how we learn to discernment. You know, it comes from this. You can start out with, let's start out with energetically, which this comes from St. Ignatius's Examen, which is that when something is coming from God, it generates peace and tranquility. When something is coming from any type of confused, you know, a parallel might be a wandering spirit, lost soul. So any type of confused thing, and especially dark, you're not going to feel at peace. You're going to feel not sure. You're going to feel agitated. You're not going to feel peace and tranquil. You're not going to be like, yes. You see? And another aspect of this is part of the reason for the purification path is, you know, we form our conscience based on a lot of factors. So one of the reasons for the study of mystical theology is learning more about moral law. And by learning more about moral law, it helps us in this discernment process to know, okay, there are certain factors in what is being shared with me as to whether or not we can automatically toss this one out, or whether it might be coming from a higher source. And then there is also the discernment of spirits as a rule, which is the biblical discernment of spirits, is that if you have the opportunity in an out-of-body experience, or if you're having an interior locution, or if you are hearing it psychically, you ask the spirit, are you coming from our Lord Jesus Christ? Have you been sent from God to teach me? You also then ask, do you believe in God the Father, Jesus Christ, his only Son, that Jesus came down from heaven, was incarnate of the Virgin Mary, and became man? Those are the important factors in the biblical discernment, because especially demons and, of course, lost souls and wandering spirits, all of these actually they're bound by eternal law, that they have to reveal themselves, and they will turn away and go. So it is a very important thing. There's a lot more to it, but you can learn that in the course of study and start reading some of the reading materials, and you'll start that process.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you so much. Now, a personal question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What put you on this path? Because you are a prolific writer. When they said the number of books, Brian was saying how many books. I was like, how many? What got you on this path?
Well, when I was 9 years old, I had this beautiful vision where the heavens opened, and a beautiful marble staircase appeared before me that went to the heavens, and there were two thrones up there. One was who I perceived as God the Father and God the Son, sitting side by side, and on the side of these were lined with angels and these beautiful billowy clouds. And basically, you know, it was a lengthy experience, but I was told that this would come back to me later in life, that there would be difficulties. I was shown some of the difficulties I would have, but it would come back to me later in calling that I had to fulfill. and that it was necessary. Then when I was told, I just spontaneously, it came back and it started going and started journaling it. And that's where it all started.
Wow. That's amazing. I thought there must be some sort of story there. Now, this is going to take us back to what you talked about last week. One of the things I was wondering about, because you talked about the out of body experiences, and I was wondering, can you help us make sense of the world based on your out of body experiences? Because the way you described it is as though it gave you some kind of perspective on the world and what's happening. So is there anything you can share with us from that viewpoint?
Well, it's definitely hard to put in words, but everything makes sense. It really does make sense when you go into these mystical spheres and you connect with the infinite mind of God. All of a sudden, all these things that don't seem to work together, and it's like, well, how does that work with that and that, and you're like, oh, it all works. You're like, wow. So, what I would say the overall thing is that, yes, we do have a purpose here. There is a similarity in our purpose, and it is this purification path. And the more that we can accomplish in this journey, this spiritual journey, while we are living, while we are conscious physical human beings, the better for our eternal soul. The happier we will be with our progress at the end of our lives here, because there is a certain amount of knowledge that we need to embody into physical form. And so there is a reason for this physical embodiment of wisdom. And so, we hear from a lot of people, oh, I'll do that after I'm dead. And it's like, okay, well, that kind of negates the point of being here. You know what I mean? So we don't want to just, necessarily just throw that out the window, because we are here for that purpose. We're here for that purpose, to actually bring as much of the spirit into this physical embodiment and the knowledge that comes with it into this physical world. And so these are the things that are of substance and matter to our existence here. And so that's what we should all consider striving for while we're here, not wasting our time. A lot of my mystical experiences, I would always hear this: stop wasting your time. You know what I mean? And it's funny because a lot of people that come to my site and who subsequently start having experiences will have the same kinds of admonitions. Stop wasting time, because we don't have that much time. Going back to the fact that we are mortal beings, some of us live 100 years, and that's not that much, but many of us live 20, 10, 30, 35, 40. None of us know when our time is up here, so we want to get as much of the work done while we're here as we can.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, this might sound like a crazy curveball question, and this is something I was called out on a few weeks ago. I was saying, "Oh, come on, universe, come on, God," and the person said, "What are you asking for? God is the universe." And in my mind, the universe is the overarching thing, and then God sits within the universe. I'm like, no, it's the other way around. And I'm like, let's just get this cleared up, shall we? And I don't mind which the answer is. From your perspective, how would you answer that question?
Whether God is the universe or whether he's hanging out somewhere in the universe, it's really a bit of both. It's really a bit of both. And it's hard to actually conceptualize, because when you start having the mystical experiences, you experience this differently. But yes, the universal being, the universal out-breath, all of it, all of us, we are all out-breaths of God. You know, everything that we see around us is an outbreath of God. So all creation and all universal being is God. But what we do also see is that there are many and various mechanisms of God, and we experience them in different mystical and out-of-body travel realms. So, for instance, you will experience a place I call the throne room of God, where it's a beautiful, beautiful place, where it's almost like this. It's almost impossible to describe, but I'll try. But it's, you know, you go in there and you just see swirling before you lives and destinies of millions of souls, human, animal, people, plants, the world, worlds, you know, and you see how God in his infinite mind is responding to all of these needs simultaneously all at the same time, and you're like, wow. You know, it's an amazing thing, because you really do see he is able to do that somehow, and he does. Then you have other aspects where you literally, you know, you touch into, you attach into that unconditional love of God that he has for his creatures, for his creation. And a lot of near-death experiencers and out-of-body travelers talk about that. Then you also have that wisdom, that knowledge, the mysteries of God that people touch into in the same things. Then you have other aspects, which are higher mysteries, the initiations into the mysteries and rites of passage, which are the higher mysteries. And there are infinite numbers more aspects. So you do have both. He is the universal being. However, he also has these aspects that can, in some respects, almost seem to be apart, but they're not. But they are, just as, you know, St. Paul talked about the different parts of the body and the head and the feet and how we all work together. They are parts of the body of God. You know, and so these are, you know, the eyes of God, the mouth of God, the ears of God, and we experience those things in the mystical.
Wow. And I'm just checking the time. We're good. Okay, that's amazing. Now, one of the things that, and I say this myself as well, when people say, "Are you religious?" I say, "No, I'm more spiritual," because one of the things I've seen about religion is the dogma. You are one of those unusual people who seem to have studied all of the religions, and you have found a way of weaving them into your teachings. So, when you distill the religions down, is there something which is, I mean, it may just be it's love, but is there something you found which is a common thread between all of these wonderful religions, which would then maybe take us away from the dogma and the fighting, which religion is also known for?
Wow, that's like a can of worms because there's so many. Oh my gosh. But well, first of all, yes, absolutely. Love, love, absolutely. But let's just throw out a few more. For instance, one of the other common things in the religions, almost all the religions were founded upon a revelation of God to somebody. And these were out-of-body experiences in most cases. And so we see that as a commonality. People don't realize, you know, out-of-body experiences are what is the founding point of many of these religions. So we have that. We also have, you know, when you go to the mystics of these religions, despite whatever the different dogmas may be, the mystics are in a great deal of agreement on things like the love of God, the oneness of all life, the great light of God, and many of the mystical things that we all talk about in relation to near-body experiences. Bridal mysticism is something that all of the mystics from all the traditions talk about, write about. And so there are so many things that you would find. Now, one thing I'd like to point out about this, if you go back, and this is important for people to think about, we forget how, in our modern world where we can all talk to each other, that there were times when people couldn't. So, go back to Stone Age religion, okay? And in the Stone Age world where people supposedly could not communicate with each other. Now, we know that there's always historical research going on and different theories about who traveled where. But in the very beginnings, when it's pretty clear that it was pretty hard for people to be traveling all over the world, we find that in every culture, New Zealand, Australia, the Americas, Canada, South America, the European countries, Nordic countries, all of these countries, Germanic, Egyptian, African, they all had shamanic type traditions, and they're all almost identical. Why? Well, it just is very interesting that what we have in the ancient documents from these practitioners was, they had their, designated shamans who were to speak to the spirit world. And, some of them did some strange things too. So I'm not just saying, hey, witch doctoring. No, but but there were some things here historically that tell us some important facts. So they all had that, and they were all touching into the same universal consciousness. And this is why they had almost identical practices in their shamanistic traditions. Siberia as well. Let's try to find somebody who traveled up there. Our shamanistic traditions were actually considered to be founded in Siberia. They're considered to be the home of the shamanistic traditions. So this tells us that we are able to determine that the mystics are touching into something that they can all reach from wherever they are. And we see this with the Muslim Sufis, the Jewish Kabbalistic mystics, the Christian and Catholic mystics, Hindu mystics, Buddhist mystics, and I'm missing somebody, I'm sure, Native American mystics, the Baha'i mystics too. But there is a huge congruity between their experiences, and that's really quite important, because that's where we find it. When you do the dogma, you're talking about dogma. What happens with any revelation, generally people will try to take that revelation and codify it. And because revelation, out-of-body experience, is a Holy Spirit experience, you can't really do that, because it's a completely different thing than a dogmatic, structured thing. So anytime that happens, which it does in every religion, it gets into this codified, structural, dogmatic thing. So it moves further away from the original revelation. But when you pull yourself back to the original revelation, which is, where was this founded? And who are the people who are maintaining that tradition through the mystical spheres? That's where you're going to find the gold. That's where the Holy Spirit continues to speak to us.
Marilyn,
and that's where they're all talking to that same spirit. They're all able to reach into that, and it tells us we're all talking and able to connect to that same God.
Oh, that is amazing. Thank you so much. And I can see why they found you as the 9-year-old and said, hey, get ready. You are a great conduit for this information. Now, I've got 3 questions for you in the 5 or so minutes we've got left. I'm going to tell you what they are so you can think on them. Number 1, I'd like a quick bio who is Brian? Because he's popped up several times. He's lovely. I want to know a little bit more. Number two, I'm going to ask you to say a few minutes about the movie that we're going to be watching at the top of the hour. And number three, I'm going to ask you for some closing thoughts. So let's go. Who's Brian? Give us a quick bio.
Brian Marilyn is the producer of the film you're about to see. And ironically, he came to me a few years back. He was my spiritual counseling client for a year or so. And then he was like, I'm on fire. I want to start doing some filming. He was already a filmmaker and he wanted to start doing this. So he came up with the idea of starting this. And then as we were doing some podcasts, he started creating vignettes, and then he did this film. And this film, I think he did a fantastic job. It's called The Grand Phases of the Soul. And what it's going to do is lay out for you what is laid out in the Mysteries of the Redemption, a treatise on out-of-body travel and mysticism, which goes through the purification, discrimination, and discipline pathways, and there are steps in each of those pathways, which will be laid out in the film. And we talk about it, and Brian put together this beautiful thing with that whole theme in mind, and it's going to help you understand the phases that the soul takes. You know, once you begin this purification journey, the kinds of things you can expect to happen and go through spiritually, and how they start happening, what occurs. Beautiful cinematic experience that he just did a beautiful job. Brian's become a good friend, and I'm glad you all enjoyed Brian, because he's been really helpful, and he's great. He's great. And, in terms of closing thoughts, I just encourage people to never stop searching. Never stop. And you know what? You're never too old to start. So, no matter how old or young you are, you're not too young and you're not too old. You just do it. Wherever you're at, you just start and you don't worry about it. Just never stop searching. You can go to the website at outofbodytravel.org, download more books, start the study. We're going to use in the order of life that would be helpful for you. This workshop, so that you can kind of take steps I'd like you to take after and also you'll get that handout on the specific quotes and the books and saints, prophets, mystics we talked about today and last week. And but never stop searching, because it's amazing how you will accelerate your whole life here. You can bring heaven to earth, even if in your own life only, but you won't be able to help that it will radiate to others. But you can bring that into your world. And, because we do sort of have this tendency to choose what we're going to be living in our day-to-day life, regardless of what's going on around us. One of the things that I was shown in a mystical experience years ago was about, and it's kind of a hard contrast, so I'm throwing out a tricky contrast, but I was shown this beautiful vision, and it was called, the Exodus vision, and it was about some of the Jews who died in the concentration camps in World War II. And I was shown how some of these souls had literally achieved ability to embody heaven on earth, even in the concentration camp. Their faith, their spiritual integrity, their presence. And I'm getting really, really hit with energy. It was right there with God, despite what was going on all around them. And this was shown to me as one of the ultimate human attainments. We've seen this as well, like St. Maximilian Kolbe was a Catholic saint to maintain heaven on earth in a concentration camp as well, who died in a concentration camp. But also we see this with people of profound faith in many traditions and not necessarily in traditions, who are able to hold a spiritual place. And we can live this way regardless of what we see going on around us in the physical world. And it was such a beautiful vision. And I'll just kind of leave it at that, because there's no way to really quantify that in a few minutes, but but we'll let you contemplate that. It's a good one for meditation, right?
Oh, Marilyn, it's been such a pleasure spending time with you. Thank you so much for the incredible keynote last week, the wonderful workshop and guided processes today. And we are now going to head into this wonderful movie, so I cannot wait to see it. Thank you so much, Marilyn.
Thank you, Marilyn. It's been great to meet you and honored to be a part of everything. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. And for the rest of you guys out there around the world, pull up your popcorn if that's the thing that you like when you're having a movie. And it's going to start now, and it runs for, I believe, about an hour and 30 minutes. Is that right, Marilyn?
It's about there, yes. I think so.
Brilliant. Wonderful. And so at the end of the movie, I'll just pop back. I'll wish you all good night. I'll remind you about what's happening tomorrow. But for now, pull up your snacks, enjoy the movie, and we'll see you after it's done.